Running a 100-mile ultramarathon is extremely challenging. There's no easy 100-mile ultramarathon. But there are some races that are notorious for being extremely difficult. Some of these that are extremely challenging, that are considered the hardest race in the world. Whether you're facing crazy weather, big mountain, tight cutoff, those races will push you to your limits. And that's what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about the 10 toughest ultramarathon of 100 mile or more. Hi, Simon here. Welcome to my channel. I'm an ultra runner on my way to racing 100 mile ultramarathon. And I always try to pick difficult race, mountain race, desert race. I want the challenge. And I've experienced some of the toughest but also the most beautiful race in the world, and I want to share that experience with you. On my channel, you'll also find a lot of tips video to help you have your own adventure. And today, I might be able to help you pick your next challenge. Today, I'm going to talk about the 10 toughest ultramarathon in the world of 100 mile or more so that you can pick your next challenge and really push your limit. Or maybe avoid them and focus on something that is a little bit less extreme. And before we dive into the list itself, let's talk about some of the ground rules. So first of all, I tried as much as possible to talk about the race that I've done myself, or I know a lot of people that have done it, which means that yes, there will be a bias towards US focused race. I'll include international race also. I have some experience there, but obviously I'm not familiar with every race in the world. I think I have a pretty good pedigree when it comes to the different races I've done, but I haven't raced so much in Asia, for example, so I don't have as much knowledge. So first of all, in the comments below, I would love to hear about these races because I'm also looking for new challenges. So let me know in the comments below. Also, this is a very subjective list. This is based on my experience and what I find challenging. So please let me know in the comments below if you agree, disagree, if you think other races should be included. And finally, what do I even mean about the 10 toughest ultramarathon in the world of 100 mile or more? So first of all, I tried to focus as much as possible on 100-mile distance. But there are some races that I had to sneak in there that are not exactly 100 mile, but really the focus is 100 mile, and there are some exceptions to that. The second piece is that there's different things that can make a race challenging. And I don't only mean like, oh, is it the weather, is it the elevation gain, but more broadly, I think there's a combination of the course itself is very challenging and you will be very tired afterwards. But there's also the factor of the cutoff. A course that is extremely difficult, but you have generous cutoff is maybe not the hardest ultramarathon out there because you can really take your time, you can sleep, you can really manage your race. Whereas some other race, the course itself is not that hard, but you're left with so little time that you really have to hustle and not many things can go wrong. So I'll try to touch a little bit on this nuance a little bit. Is it difficult because the course is challenging or because the cutoff itself is challenging? Let's get into that list with number 10. And number 10 is a big famous race. It's Badwater 135. Badwater 135 is one of these iconic races. It's one of the old school races in the US, and it's notorious or famous because it is so freaking hot out there. You can easily be in the 110, 120 Fahrenheit, which is in the 50 Celsius, extremely hot. The temperature that you feel just from the ground, the asphalt, is absolutely crazy. When you're racing this, the wind really feels like you're opening the oven. It's just suffocatingly hot. It's 135 miles that starts in Badwater Basin, and you cross 2 or 3 mountain range all the way to Whitney Portal. So you do have some climbing, and all of this is done on asphalt, which means, yeah, it's not a technical race, which is great, but 135 mile on asphalt when it's hot, your feet will suffer a lot. The race itself even proclaims to be the toughest foot race on earth. That's obviously a statement that I disagree with, but it is a very challenging race. Even more challenging is to get into the race. You have to go through a selection committee. There's only 100 runners every year, and it's very competitive to get into the race, to be selected. You need to have a very strong pedigree. The requirements to get into the race are the toughest that I've ever seen. And just meeting the bare minimum is most likely not going to lend you a spot. You have to apply year after year until you get selected. And just a few stats about the race itself. So 135 mile, a little more than 100 mile, obviously on asphalt, so a non-technical race. In terms of elevation gain, it's about 14,000 feet of gain, and you're given 48 hours to complete that distance. And the 48 hours is really the main reason why I really don't think this is the toughest foot race in the world. You also have a lot of support. So as opposed to other races that will be on this list, you don't have aid station. What you have instead is you have a crew of 3 or 4 people in a car that is following you, and every 3 or 4 miles, they will stop. You will replenish water, you will get some ice, you will eat, you will potentially sit down, and then you go back again. So you have a lot of support for that, and you have a lot of time. So what's important is to be able to take care of yourself and control your body temperature. Now, it doesn't make it easy, but it makes it manageable for most runners. And because of the very high selection process, the finishing rate is about probably 80%. The year I did it, most people finished. And that's because only very experienced runners are doing it, and you're given enough time that if things go wrong, you can always just step back, take your time, cool down, take some ice, and then go back again. And arguably, Badwater almost didn't make this list because there's a race that I've never done myself, but I heard is much more challenging, and it's the Spartathlon in Greece, where you run about 150 miles. It's not as hot, but it's still pretty hot on asphalt. And the big difference here is that you have much less support, and the cutoff is way tighter at 36 hours. You don't necessarily need to be a pro runner to run that, but you need to be a very good runner. 150 miles in 36 hours is a pace of 24 hours or sub 24 hours for 100 miles. So it's a very fast pace for an amateur runner, and it's tough to maintain that when you're on asphalt and it's very hot. But obviously I haven't done it, so this is what I heard, but I'm curious if you've done it or if you've heard about it. Do you think Spartathlon is harder than Badwater or not? Number 9, Leadville 100 mile. So we're on a roll with the very iconic old school race in the US. Leadville 100 mile is very famous. It was featured in Born to Run, for example. So it's a race that is very popular and attracts a lot of new runners, which will be an important factor. A little bit about Leadville 100 mile is done in Leadville, and Leadville was a mining town, and they had a closure of their mine, which led to high unemployment, a lot of problem in the town. They had this idea of creating this race, this foot race, where people would come in and that would bring in money for the locality, for the people living there. And that's how Leadville 100 mile was born in the 80s, I believe. So one of the oldest 100 mile ultramarathon in the US. So Leadville 100 mile, basically you start in Leadville in town, and then you're gonna run all the way to Winfield, which is 50 mile, and then you come back. And between the two, you're climbing up and down mountain pass. Not so many of them, and it's not the most technical course, but you will go up Sugarloaf, you will go up Mini Elpert, and then the crux of the course is climbing Hope Pass, which goes a little higher than 12,000 feet. So very high altitude, and you're gonna feel the altitude. The whole race is at altitude, and that's the key challenge. The other challenge will be the very tight cutoff. You have to go relatively fast because you're only given 30 hours to finish this whole course. But as opposed to some other race that we'll talk about in Colorado, this is not a technical race. A lot of the race is done on gravel road or not super technical single track. Yes, when you go up and down Hope Pass, it's a little technical and you're not gonna go so fast, but anyway, you're climbing, so that's not where you have to worry too much about the technical course. But there's a lot of segments that are just not technical, and that's where you make up speed, that's where you make up time so that you can fit under the cutoff of 30 hours. A few stats about Leadville. So it's 100 mile with about 15,000 feet of elevation gain that is mostly concentrated on a few climbs. You're given 30 hours to complete the course, but also you have a lot of cutoff within that 30 hours. In particular, at mile 40 and 60, you have some pretty tight cutoff that you have to run the beginning of the race. You cannot pace so conservatively, otherwise you're going to be out. And that leads to a finishing rate between about 50 or 60%, which depends a little bit on the weather. Also, something to mention is that it can be all over the place. In Colorado, in the middle of the summer like that, afternoon is very often shower and thunderstorm. And that's potentially the time of the day where you're actually going up and down Hope Pass. So the worst time to have a storm is when you're high at altitude. At the same time, it's high altitude, the whole race can be pretty hot, so you can get dehydrated, you can have a lot of problem eating, and all of these factors together will slow you down, and that's where you miss the cutoff by 5 minutes. But I think that the finishing rate is also affected by the fact that it's a very popular race, and some people will do it as their first race. And my only advice is, look, if that's a race that is exciting for you, go for it. But if not, I do suggest that you have experience with 100 mile before doing Leadville, or that you have significant experience at altitude to understand what will happen to your body, because it's very easy to underestimate how difficult Leadville can be. Number 8, Cruel Jewel 100 mile in Georgia. Cruel Jewel is an extremely challenging race and it's very deceptive. On paper it looks difficult, but it's way harder than it looks, and it's partially because it is in Georgia and it is the East Coast. For those not familiar with Cruel Jewel, it's 100 mile in May in Georgia in the Blue Ridge Mountain Range, or I believe that's the name anyway. And what makes this race difficult? Well, first of all, it's an East Coast race, so you don't think big mountain when you think about East Coast, but it has something like 34,000 feet of elevation gain, which is a lot. We're talking about numbers that are comparable to races like UTMB and Hardrock, which are considered the high mountain race. But you go in Georgia and these 1, 2, 3,000 feet climb just non-stop, back to back to back to back to back. You're always climbing. It's a huge amount. But on top of that, you add the tiny element that you're on the East Coast, which means it's not the most technical trail for East Coast, but it is relatively easy to trip on roots, on rocks, on all of these things that are not super visible because there's a lot of leaves, dead leaves on these trails, so you don't have as good visibility. You also have a ton of poison ivy, so that's not going to make the race challenging, but a few days later when you have blisters everywhere in your leg, you're going to regret your life choice a little bit. But really, I think for me, what made it particularly difficult, Cruel Jewel itself, is really the combination of a lot of climbing, but also it is so hot and humid and potentially will rain, potentially not, but it's the suffocating kind of heat. It's not like Badwater where you always feel dry because you're sweating nonstop, but it's so dry that you're actually cooling down. Over there, it just feels so swampy and so stuck all the time. You also don't have so much visibility. There's always this green foliage all around you, so you don't have views, you don't have anything to distract you other than it's so painful right now. And most likely you will have blisters because your feet will most likely be wet. So all in all of these factors together make Cruel Jewel a very challenging race. And just a few stats about the race itself. It's 100 mile. And it's kind of a 50 mile in and out, but it's a little more complicated than that. You kind of do detours on the way back, which is super annoying because you just want to be done, but then you do an extra kind of in and out that is super tiring. You have 48 hours though to do it. And I think the 48 hours is the only saving grace for a Cruel Jewel. It's enough time to do this race. It's enough time to slow down, take care of yourself. But don't make any mistakes. This race is super challenging. Physically, you will be absolutely destroyed. So much so that the finishing rate is about 50-60%. And the same, it really depends on the year. If you have a year that is really, really hot, oh boy, people will be dropping like fly. It's so easy to have a heat stroke in these conditions. So if you want a challenging East Coast race, Cruel Jewel might be the one for you. Number 7, Hurt 100 mile in Hawaii. So we're sticking with the theme of hot and humid, right? But we're on the total opposite side. And Hurt, just like Cruel Jewel, is so misleadingly difficult. Hurt is 100 mile in Hawaii on Honolulu, so the main island. And it's a loop course. Not the most exciting, right? Loop course, but it is an extremely fun and great race. One of my favorite racing experiences, but also one of the most challenging. It's 5 times 20 miles loop. And there's a lot of elevation gain, and these climbs are super difficult. It's very steep, it's very tiring, and what makes it particularly challenging is that even when you're going downhill, it's actually really tricky, and sometimes you have to be walking so that you don't break your face or fall or trip or hurt yourself. Because Hurt is in the jungle, it's in Hawaii, and it's super technical. It's one of the most technical courses that I have on the whole list. It's a lot of roots, it's a lot of mud, it most likely will be raining, pouring down, and you still have to go pretty fast on these downhills. But you step on roots, it's muddy, you're gonna slip, you're gonna fall. And myself, even the week before, I was scouting the course and I tripped and really hurt my toe enough that there was probably a tear or something wrong with my toe on race day because of that. During the race itself, I believe there were 2 people that fell down a cliff enough that they broke a leg or something like that and had to be evacuated. So that's that level of technicality for the race. It's not just that you're going to slow down, it's also that even if you're slowing down, even if you're careful, you're probably going to fall, and if you're unlucky, you're going to hurt yourself real bad. But it's not just that it's technical, it's also very physical. It can get really hot, very humid, very stuffy, just like Cruel Jewel. You just cannot cool down, but you gotta hustle because you don't have a lot of time. And that's one of these races where the The course is actually pretty challenging, but if you were given a good cutoff or a generous amount of time, you would manage. You'd be able to hike most of the time and it would be fine. But that's not the case for Hurt. For Hurt, you gotta run, you gotta make up time somewhere. Otherwise, you're gonna be dropped due to cutoff. A few stats about it. It's a 100-mile, and in terms of elevation gain, I think it's about 24,000 feet of gain, and these climbs are super steep, super difficult. In terms of technicality, one of the most technical course on the list. It's not that it's rocky, it's just rooty, slippery. You have to watch your footing, and most importantly, you just never know when you're gonna step and just your feet will go woo! No traction whatsoever. You're stepping on something that looks totally normal, and your feet will go under you and you're gonna fall. And very often you're on the edge of some cliff, and if you're unlucky, that's where you're gonna fall down, and until you catch yourself on a tree or something, you're gonna tumble and hurt yourself. The cutoff is also 36 hours, which for 100 mile of that level of technicality and that amount of elevation gain makes it one of the toughest races in the world. Finishing rate is probably around 50-60% also, but that is also misleading because most of the people that race Hurt are actually really good runner. Number 6, UTMB, Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc in Europe. So we're finally going international. Sorry for keeping you waiting on that one. And that's one of the few exceptions on the list that I actually didn't do myself, but I plan to do eventually. UTMB is one of the most famous races in the world. It's 100 miles around the Massif du Mont Blanc in Europe. So it goes through 3 different countries, France, Italy, and Switzerland. Now they would be considered the Super Bowl or the World Cup or whatever, but the best runner in the world are facing off there. But you're not going to see them much. I don't know how they finish the race in the low 20 hours, but that's what they do. Normal people take way more time. And why? Because this course is very challenging. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, it's iconic. It's the high mountain. Oh my God, it's the Alps. This is great. And I've been there with Nora. I've seen the trail. We've done a lot of the Tour du Mont Blanc outside of the race itself. And it's great, but those climb super steep and very technical sometimes. So technical actually that unfortunately Nora did fall down and did hurt herself very significantly, major tear in her ankle, which pulled her off running for about 3 months. So a very severe injury, and obviously Nora is a good runner, accident happened, but it wouldn't happen, running on the sidewalk. This was a very technical course. And what makes this race absolutely iconic is that you're in the Alps, it's gorgeous views, and these trails are hardcore, very technical, not like Hurt where you have muds and slippery things. It's very rocky, and you will have to really watch your footing because it's easy to slip a little bit and then roll your ankle, fall down, hurt yourself. It's a lot of elevation gain also. I think it's 30 to 33,000 feet of gain, which is one of the highest that we'll see on this list. High in the mountain. It's not as high altitude as a race like Leadville or another race that we'll talk about very soon, but it's still a decent altitude and you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel it in your lung. It's good if you can get there ahead of time to get a little bit more acclimated, but we're not talking about 12,000 feet of elevation. And a few stats about UTMB. It's a little more than 100 mile actually. I believe it's something more like 105 or 110. And as I mentioned, about 33,000 feet of elevation gain. So a lot of gain. You're very often just hiking up or running downhill. But some of the downhill are actually pretty runnable, so you can make up some of the time. But sometimes it's also just technical and you just got to watch it. In terms of cutoff, I believe it's 46 hours. So it's a very generous amount of time, but given the amount of elevation gain, you still kind of have to keep rolling. But I believe that's one of the saving grace of the race is that they didn't create a crazy cutoff that only elite runner could finish. Finishing rate is about 60%. And I would say that it's because it's a mix of runners that are very experienced. Getting into the race itself implies that you have done 100 miles before. It takes a lot of points or stone to kind of get in. So you have experienced runner and we can't really look too much at the finishing rate. But still, for a race where you're an experienced runner, the DNF rate is relatively high. Number 5, Diagonale des Fous Grand Raid on Ile de la Réunion. So we're again outside of the US. This is 100 miles done on Ile de la Réunion in the Indian Ocean. You have the island, which is fairly big, and you just run in diagonal across it. And this is a volcanic island with a lot of jungle, a lot of mud, a lot of very beautiful cliff, very beautiful mountain. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most scenic courses that I've ever seen. It's very special to go there. And this course has it all. Don't get fooled by the beauty of it. Wow, this is a challenging course. This is one of the most challenging, just the course itself of the whole list. And it's not taking number one of the most difficult race for other reason, but we're talking about super technical trail. It's rocky, rooty, super muddy, super slippery. You're not allowed to have poles also because of environment conservation there. So you have even more challenge to keep up straight when the ground is just so slippery and wet and you slip. There's nothing you can do other than fall down. And some of these falls can be pretty painful. And on top of that, you have a lot of elevation gain. It's about 30,000 feet of elevation gain, which means it's a relentless amount of climbing, downhill, technical, being careful, slowing down. Absolutely crazy. On top of that, the weather can be pretty difficult to deal with. It can be very hot and very humid. It's the jungle again, but then sometimes you're closer to the ocean, so it doesn't feel like the kind of jungle heat, but instead it's the beach heat, which is also difficult but different to deal with. When I raced it myself, it also had a lot of rain. It was pouring down, so it was even more slippery. And due to the very high number of runner, I believe it's about 2,000 runner, and I'm not at the beginning of the pack. That means that when you're running on these rocks, towards the middle of the race, there's mud on it. It's super tricky. It's super slippery, and you have it always to deal between people. So it was very difficult. You had to be kind of mentally there all the time. You couldn't just kind of slip off and think about something else or look at the pretty view. No, you had to focus on what's going on all the time. You're super tired also because the race started in the evening. I can't remember the time, if it was 6 or 8 p.m. But that means that you're already starting and you're going to go through the night already, and you'll probably finish after 2 nights of running. And a few stats about the race Diagonale des Fous. It's probably the race on that list, except for UTMB, that is the largest crowd, and it's something that you will really feel because there's so much single track. Distance-wise, it's a little more than 100 miles with 30,000 feet of gain. But the cutoff is very generous. I believe it was 66 hours. I'm not even sure, but that means that you really can take your time. Those nights when you're tired, you can actually lay down and sleep, reset, and go again. So if they had a more strict cutoff, something like 48 hours, yeah, that would probably be the toughest race I've ever done. But because there was a fair amount of time to be able to deal with situation, that gave you the flexibility to slow down when you need. Still, whoa, when you finish this race, you're absolutely trashed. You cannot believe that you've done that. You have mud everywhere. You're chafing everywhere because it's humid all the time. But what an accomplishment. Number 4, Hardrock 100 mile in the San Juan Mountain in Colorado. So we're back in the US and we're back with the very famous race, the Hardrock 100 mile. It's a race that if you like UTMB, you probably will like Hardrock, and there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of European runners that are coming to the US for Hardrock, for the high mountain. Hardrock is beautiful. The San Juan Mountain is in the southwest in Colorado. You have a lot of 14,000 feet mountain in the area. Some of them are class 3, class 4, really fun climb. You're not doing that for the race itself, except you actually do climb up to 14,000 when you go up Hendy's Mountain or Hendy's Peak, which is a 14,000 feet mountain, but not the most technical. Hardrock will be a big loop that you either do clockwise or counterclockwise depending on the year. A lot of single track, a lot of climbing. We're talking about something like 33,000 feet of climbing, and some of that is very technical. There's a downhill in particular, I can't remember the name right now, but it's just a lot of loose screw, and most people are actually doing that on their butt. When you see it, you look at it and say, wow, like I don't think that's the right direction. There's no trail, there's no way that's what you're supposed to do. But yes, this is the way you're supposed to go. Also, Hardrock, it's in the wild. You're in Colorado, in the deep wilderness, which means that you might have to deal with bears, you might have to deal with mountain lion, you really could face anything out there. And again, it's Colorado, it's July, which is somewhat early season, which means that you might be crossing snowfield, which means that you have to understand how to deal with that. But at the same time, it can be very hot. You can have huge thunderstorm in the middle of the afternoon that you have to deal at high altitude, which can sometimes be just dangerous. So you have to understand nature. You have to understand how to deal with these things in the wilderness. Now, a few stats about Hardrock. So yes, it's 100 mile, a little more than that, about 33,000 feet of gain, which is again one of the highest number that we'll see on this list. But also a lot of single track, a lot of very technical running going out there. And you're given 48 hours. 48 hours is fairly generous for that, which means that you could be walking a fair amount of it and still finish, but you gotta keep grinding, you gotta keep moving. And the thing that makes it, for me, particularly challenging is the added bonus that you're at very high altitude. Yes, UTMB, you're up in the mountain, but in terms of just pure altitude, Hardrock goes all the way to 14,000 feet. That's very high, and there's a lot of problem that comes with that. As I mentioned at Leadville, yes, you're going to be tired, out of breath all the time. As soon as you start climbing, you're going to have difficulties. But especially when you start adding more and more hours at altitude, at least for me, that's where you start having really long problems. You're going to be coughing a lot. You're going to have difficulty breathing. You won't be able to eat appropriately. Just everything just piles up, and you're not eating well, you don't have energy, you don't have the energy, you're walking slower, you're up at altitude longer, you have headache, you're dehydrated. It's just kind of piling up, and you just want to be done at some point. When it comes to finishing rate though, surprisingly, the finishing rate is about 80 to 90% finishing rate, which is one of the highest on this list. The only one that was as high was Badwater. Obviously, Hardrock is a much more challenging race, much more challenging course, but why is it so high, the finishing rate? And the reason is that what's the hardest of all of that, in my opinion, is not necessarily finishing Hardrock under cutoff. The hardest thing by far is to get selected for Hardrock. Hardrock is lottery based, and it can take you 5, 8, 10 years very easily of applying every year to get in. And it's not just you put your name and then they might pick you. Every 2 years, you have to have a Hardrock qualifier, and the list of Hardrock qualifier is not so long. You have, I don't know, maybe 30 races that are selected specifically for being challenging race, mountain race that you kind of have to be in pretty good shape and a pretty good ultra runner. Most of these races are not races that I would recommend for a first timer 100 miler. So just the list that you have are races that you have to be somewhat seasoned veteran in terms of ultra runner and mountain running to be able to complete, and you have to do that year after year after year until finally they pick your name, which can easily, as I said, take 10 years. For a lot of people, Hardrock, including myself, is this dream race that someday I really hope that they finally pick me. I would love to do Hardrock. I love the San Juan. I've been in the air very often. I love these mountains. It's exactly the type of race I do. But realistically, I still gotta wait probably like 5 years before I get in, which means that by then, I'll have a lot of experience. I know what I'm doing, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a high finishing rate. The other reason for that is that once you're selected for Hardrock, look, I race 100 milers sometimes back to back, 1 week apart, and whatever, I'll see what happens. When I'm going to be picked for Hardrock, you can best believe that I'm not going to put any race just before that, because I want to be sure that I come in very healthy, very fit, and ready to rock and roll. I will put everything that year for being able to race it, which also means I'll go in Colorado ahead of the race. I'll be climbing a lot of 14ers. I'll go Schneffel, Wilson Group, the Chicago Basin, like some of the coolest hike I've ever done. Day after day after day after day, being at 14,000 and just getting used to altitude. I'm not just gonna gamble my one ticket that I will get someday for Hardrock. I'm gonna make sure I finish, and even if I have a very bad day, even if I'm struggling, I'm going to make sure I finish that one. That's not one of those that, well, I can always come back next year. Before we dive into our top 3, if you appreciate this video, please leave a thumbs up. Comments below, do you agree, disagree with my list? Anything you would add, please let me know. This is helping this channel stay alive. I focus much more on these things rather than just sponsorship and pushing product all the time. And you can even consider a contribution to my Patreon page. But of course, you don't have to. As long as you appreciate my stuff, that's what matters to me. So thanks for watching, and let's dive into top 3. Actually, it's a lie. Let's not dive into top 3. There are some honorable mentions that I want to mention. As I said at the beginning, obviously, I try to focus as much as possible on races that I've done myself to not talk out of my ass. And I think I have a pretty broad range of experience, but I think collectively we have more experience. And some races that I would want to mention that I haven't done myself or I just don't know enough, that are especially outside of the US. So one of them is the Spine race. The other thing that I haven't included so much is all of these 200 miler or more, or even like these kind of almost expedition 500 mile. And this is kind of too far from the 100 mile that I was trying to talk about. There will be an exception later on this race, and I'm sure if you've seen my channel, you know exactly what's the race I'm going to talk about later. But I try to maintain it, not so much to these races. And finally, something that obviously I haven't mentioned even once, it's because I don't have experience there, but there's no winter race. And last piece, of course, like as I mentioned, I don't have as much experience for races outside of the US, which I wish I did, you know? And if you have races that you really highly recommend, especially that you think they're very challenging but match some other races that I've done in the past, let us know in the comments below. I would love to travel for these races sometimes. Obviously, I cannot travel all the time. I mean, I have a full-time job and we're not exactly rich, right? But sometimes I do make exception and I go a little further for some of these races, like kind of like the special treat of the year. So if you have a really cool race, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear about it. Number 3, I think people on my channel know which one it will be, and it is Ouray 100 mile. Ouray 100 mile is 100 mile right outside of the Hardrock 100 mile. It's even, I think, 1 week or 2 weeks after Hardrock 100 mile. Also in Colorado, also in the San Juan, you actually share a little bit of the trail. Ouray 100 mile, as opposed to Hardrock, is not a big loop. Instead, it's a collection of smaller hike that you're doing up and down, and you're going somewhere else up and down, and you're going around Irontown, you do a mountain pass, you come back. So it's not as neat in terms of like this really cool 100-mile loop, but it allows the race director to pick some pretty gnarly trail, you know, very, very difficult, a lot of climbing, but also so much beauty. As I said, the San Juan area in Colorado is by far my favorite. I think it's the prettiest, it's the wildest, it's the craziest place when it comes to the mountain and what you have over there. But that means that the course is rugged. Just like Hardrock, it's high at altitude. You're almost always above 10,000 feet. You don't quite go as high. You don't go to 14,000, but I believe you go to 13 or 13,500. So you're still really high in the mountain and you're gonna feel it. And on top of that, you have about 42,000 feet of gain, okay? This is crazy. If you've done a race with 38,000 feet of gain, probably the way you would summarize it is, we were always climbing. Well, you add to 42,000 feet, it's not just that you're always climbing, it's you're always climbing some really steep crap all the time. So steep that very often the downhill, you don't want to be running that. You got to be careful, you got to watch out, because the trail is relatively technical. It's not the most technical, it's not the most challenging, but there are some parts where, yeah, you gotta watch out because you could fall, you could hurt yourself. It's very rocky. Sometimes it's kind of powdery rock where you can very easily lose your footing. And on top of that, we come back to the fact that it is Colorado, it is in July, you can have pretty bad weather. It's pretty famous for having really bad weather. The race itself is a little more than 100 miles. I don't know what they say officially. They probably say 104. It always clocks higher than that. I think mine was probably 110 or something. Of course, watch are not 100% accurate, but it is what it is. Elevation gain, 42,000 feet. Like, I don't know how they could have more than that. In terms of time, you have 52 hours. And compared to the other one, like UTMB, you had 46, I think, and Hardrock 48, 52. It seems to be on par, but actually, I don't think it is. I think the 52 hours is actually pretty tight, and that's why I put it even higher than the other race. Yes, it's because there's more elevation gain, but the amount of time that you're given to do that is not that much. You gotta keep rolling. Yeah, you can sleep a little bit, take care of yourself, but 52 hours for a course like that is actually decently timed. So much so that the finishing rate is relatively low. It depends on the year, and it's getting better year after year now, but it can be finishing rate of about 40%, 50%, depends on the weather a lot if it's really bad weather. There's also wildlife. I've never seen a mountain lion in my life, but I came very close to a very hungry mountain lion when we did it ourselves. You can have a look at the movie. Number 2, Tour des Géants in Italy. All right, yeah, that's the one that is like clearly not 100 mile. I'm including it anyway because it's my list, guy, and it's my favorite racing experience. So I do want to talk about it as much as possible, and it is arguably an extremely difficult race. Tour des Géants is a 200 miler or 330 kilometer in the Alps in Italy, where you go around Valle d'Aosta, going up and down, a lot of crazy mountain pass. It's one of the most scenic, most gorgeous race I've ever done. It's absolutely wonderful. You have crazy, beautiful views, but wow, it is a butt kicker, my friend. This is not for the faint of heart at all. You're decently high at altitude. Now, it's not just like Colorado where you go up to 14,000, but you're at a significant amount of elevation, and there's a lot of climbs. Non-stop climbing, steep all the time. I believe it's about 80,000 feet of elevation gain, which is a lot. You know, you take Ouray 100 mile and you double that. And that's what you have. You have Tour des Géants. absolutely crazy, right? It's even more technical than a lot of the other races that we talked about. I'd say it's probably similar to UTMB, where you have a lot of rocks and you have to watch your footing. Sometimes there will be cliff. And add to that that Tour des Géants is pretty late in the season. It's early September, which is when you start having slow. It's when you might have to close down a mountain pass. And the year that I did it myself, yeah, we were lucky we were able to finish the race. But towards the end of the race, there was a snowstorm. The mountain pass were covered in snow, which adds to the technicality. You had to have micro spike. You had to know what you're doing because you could slip and you could die. This is not this is not for someone who's not used to the mountain. I also had pretty bad weather on the first day, or I think the first 2 days, where it rained a lot. It was very cold. You're high in the mountain. You're just soaking wet. You're miserable, and you're just climbing up, climbing down, climbing up, climbing down, climbing up for 5 days. You're so tired after that. It's absolutely crazy. But it's one of these adventures that, yeah, it is challenging, but wow, it is so rewarding. Some of the best experience ever. And it's not just that the trail is beautiful, but also the community there. You were connecting with people from everywhere across the world. It's a very famous race, so a lot of European, but also people from the US, from Japan, just running together, sharing these miles together, sharing this adventure together. And of course, the aid station with Italian food and pasta and everything. It just makes for such a rich experience that you can endure the pain, but you got to train for that. You got to prepare for that, and you got to understand mountain running. It's not just running itself, ultra running, but it's mountain running, knowing what's the gear that you will need to have. They will not spoon feed you there. You will need to understand what's going on. A few stats about Tour des Géants. So as I said, it's 330 kilometers, so about 200 miles with 80,000 feet of gain. Now, I talked about Tour des Géants, then obviously Tour des Glaciers is even harder. It's kind of the big brother of Tour des Géants. Tour des Géants is the oldest race that have been there for a longer time. But you have this 450 kilometer race, Tour des Glaciers, which you can only do if you've completed Tour des Géants under a certain amount of time. And it's less support, less aid station, more technical, no course marking. Everything about it is way harder. But that's where I kind of draw the distinction of like, okay, well, already Tour des Géants was feeling bad of including it because it's not 100 mile. Tour des Glaciers is way above that. It's much more multi-day expedition in the mountain than a 100-mile race. I felt it was going too far, but obviously it's super challenging race. I haven't done it myself also, which is one of the reasons I don't mention it. In terms of cutoff, though, you have 150 hours, which I feel is actually a pretty fair amount of time. I don't think it's super tight, but I don't think it's super generous either. 150 hours, you can sleep at these life base to be sure that once you go up the mountain, you're not hallucinating or anything like that. You can take care of yourself, but you kind of keep rolling all the time because that cutoff will be following you. And you have to always leave some buffer because condition can be pretty bad and you could have to just bunker down, like huge storm going on, you reach the refugio, maybe you wait 1 or 2 hours until it comes down or until morning because conditions are just so bad. So you have a little bit of buffer, which helps for safety, but you got to keep rolling with this 150 hours. In terms of finishing rate, it's about 50%, which for a 200 miler, usually 200 miler, the finishing rate is pretty good. So the fact that it's 50% shows that like, wow, like this is a challenging one. You don't know when you get into the race if you're going to be finishing or not. Which brings us to number one. And any list like this, we all know what will be number one. Number one is the Barkley Marathon. I haven't done it. I haven't applied for it. I really don't think I'll ever want to do that race for many reasons. But obviously, I would not be able to finish a race like that. That's the kind of race that you basically have to be a professional runner or an elite runner to even have a chance of finishing. If you're not familiar with the Barkley Marathon, it's 100 miles, though everyone claims it's more than that. But we'll never know because we don't have the course and we don't have the watch. In Tennessee, where you do loops, and these loops are all very challenging. It's very technical, a lot of elevation gain. There's no course marking. You cannot have a watch. It's just very challenging. But on top of that, the cherry on top of all of that is that the cutoff are super tight. For a course like that, it's absolutely bunker. It's absolutely crazy. You have, I think, 12 hours to do a single loop. And an average runner doesn't even stand a chance of finishing a single loop. I would not finish a loop. In fact, I would not be selected, and most likely you would not be selected. So that's the reality. And that's one of the reasons I'm less keen on a race like that. One of the goal of my channel is to make the sport accessible, which means accessible to average runner, to people that are not Killian or Courtney or Jim or these people like you, like me, that just want to have fun out there. And yes, I want challenging race and I want to push my limit, but this one is just a notch too high that it becomes very selective. It's almost impossible to get in unless you know the people. Nobody knows truly how to apply. So yeah, it's a challenging course, but it's even challenging to get in. But it is widely considered to be the toughest ultramarathon in the world. There's just a handful of people that have ever finished the race. There are several years that nobody finishes the race at all. A few stats about the race. Well, they say it's 100 miles, but I've heard things like 120, 130 miles, which is way higher than 100 miles. In terms of elevation gain, you hear something like 60,000 feet of elevation gain. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what you hear, and how can we verify anyway? Finishing rate is about 0%. Yeah, sometimes you will have more than one finisher, but usually if you finish the race, you're actually winning the race, which makes this race, the Barkley Marathon, the toughest ultramarathon in the world. And that's it, folks. This is my top 10 list of most difficult race of 100 mile or more based on my experience. I include some race that I haven't done myself because I know a lot of people that have done it, but I tried as much as possible to talk about what I actually know and compare things that I actually know. But I'm curious to hear, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with my list? Obviously, what makes a race challenging is very subjective. Maybe I don't find Badwater to be the toughest race in the world because I'm good at dealing with heat, but I struggle in the mountain. I don't think that's the case. I actually think I'm very good in the mountain. But I'm curious to hear, what are the races that you find very challenging that you would recommend for people? Please let us know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Leave a thumbs up and see you next time.